generating about 70,000 AI startup, AI native startups. So kind of like, the heyday of everyone is trying to make an app for phones. Now everyone's trying to make an app using AI. So anything you can think of, there's an AI startup for them. All right, and those who have you invested in the stock market, you're probably very happy right now. Since November 2022, the price of Nvidia has gone up almost tenfold. That's accounting for bulk of that revenues in AI hardware. A lot of companies throwing a lot of money at AI right now. What's wrong with my movie? Sure. Okay. All right, and AI does actually, show a lot of promises in a lot of fields. So the thing that I'm particularly interested in is using AI for medical application. There's many, anecdotal evidence and whatnot. This is one of the top paper published by a researcher from Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School that talks about how using AI, they were able to achieve 95% of accuracy, or more when analyzing radio images and whatnot and report. But the big question is, what is it compared to? 95 against what? 95 against human. That's assuming human is accurate in the first place. So that actually might be more than 95% in the first place. But it is still very impressive nonetheless. All right, well, since we're in the university doing research, guess what? Not surprisingly, a pretty authoritative research on how many papers that have been generated by AI since the launch of ChatGPT. And the answer is quite amazing. It's 72% more. All right, and on the sadder note, this also came out recently. In the US, the new batch of graduates from computer engineering major is one of the least employable grads right now, 7.5%. And for you to have no idea is that a higher number or lower number? The number one major the major that has the highest unemployment rate is anthropology at 9%. Okay, and this is the third highest of all the majors. And even computer science is like 6%, which is also very, very high. Surprisingly, if you major in journalism, which everybody predicts is going to be completely wiped out by AI, is actually doing not too bad at 4% unemployment rate.
So the computer engineering is doing worse than the computer science?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, computer engineering is third in the ranking, and then computer science is 6th, I think, something like that. Cool. All right, and not just new grads. If you read the news, you probably see massive amount of layoff in the US right now. All the name brand, all the big tech laying off thousands of people. People get used to these sort of news nowadays. But someone did the accounting. Since 2023, there have been 500,000 tech jobs that have been laid off. Can you attribute all of that to AI? Maybe, maybe not. No one really knows, of course. But this is definitely unusual. Right? This is the magnitude that we have not seen before since .com. And CS job used to be one of the most sought after jobs in the US. Everyone will send their kids to study computer science because they will end up having a job. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case right now. All right, so from this point onward, I'm going to talk about the more technical stuff. I'll try to talk about it at a high level, so people who don't have the actual background in AI and machine learning will be able to follow through. If you have any in-depth question you want to ask, please hold your answer till the end. I'll have a Q&A session at the end. Okay, we'll start by talking about generative AI, which is the umbrella of AI that's people are most excited about right now, and including ChatGPT and all that, folks. What is it? Hopefully, most of you have some inkling idea around it, but if not, I'll simplify it for you. you only need three things for Gen AI to work. One, heaps of data. You want lots and lots of data. Ideally, all the data in the world. Second, you need a language model, okay? And then right now, the dominating architecture is called transformer, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But think of this as, your keyboard next word prediction on steroid. It's really just, capturing the structure of a language based on the huge amount of data you throw at it. And then the third, less glamorous, less mentioned about component is reinforcement learning, okay? The reason why ChatGPT sounds like a human, a big part of that was because of this reinforcement learning. It knows how the language works and all that, but the AI, or the model itself, doesn't know how to talk like a human. What do human want to hear? How do you interact with a human? It's all attributed back to this reinforcement learning block. In essence, engineers will basically train the model and say, hey, look, these are the things that people like to hear. These are things that people don't like to hear. When you ask this question, these are the sort of things that you want to answer. So there's a lot of human work involved in there. It's not completely automated. But the first two are pretty much straightforward. You just have to throw hardware at the problem. And all of that starts from this paper, which surprisingly predate ChatGPT by 5 years. And it's gone sort of unnoticed for a long time. It was done by a bunch of researchers at Google. And ironically, I think most of them have left Google since then. And a lot of them actually start some of the best AI company out there right now. So this paper basically talk about, in a nutshell, you don't need any fancy algorithm when it comes to language. All you need to know is how is this particular word related to every other word in the sentence prior. That's basically what it boils down to. All right, and like I said, transformer is the heart of every language model out there right now. And if you want to learn more about transformer, I highly recommend to go to this website. It's highly interactive. You can play with things and all that. But I'm here showing you an example where, if you input the sentence, the best university in New Zealand is, this language model will predict Auckland. And I think you can figure out the rest. All right, so that was actually old news. This is how ChatGPT was created. Latest trend, in the past 12 months or so, is no longer a large language model. It's about a large reasoning model. Okay, so how is that different from a large language model? Think of it as a smarter version of the language model. I'll show you an example here. These are some of the benchmark on the left here, these are reasoning models, okay? O3 from OpenAI, Gemini Pro, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the right, you can see this other group here. Yeah, these are non-reasoning models, okay? And there's a clear difference in performance. These are based on some of the very, very difficult benchmark, including one of them is called the human's last exam. If you can see that there. Okay. But what makes a reasoning model different from a large language model, you'll be asking? First of all, the key ingredient is this component called chain of thought. It's a little bit hard to explain, but ultimately it's really just asking the language model to think harder. If you're interactive with ChatGPT, you probably have this experience when you ask something, ChatGPT will respond with some sort of answers. But then sometimes it answers in a very pithy way, right? There's a couple of sentences and done. But if you push it really hard, or give it more, give the language model more context, it will give you more elaborated answer. And someone discovered that if you ask the language model, say, hey, look, why don't you lay out step by step how you plan to answer my question? The language model actually does a surprisingly good job in doing that after that. Okay, the exam mechanism, at least I didn't quite understand why, but I think it's still half a mystery right now. And people basically take that and say, okay, is there any way that we can basically push a language model and say, wait, don't be lazy, just do more work, tell us more about what the real answer should be. Don't just jump to the answer immediately. And you can actually sort of relate that to human, right? So sometimes you ask a little kid, answer, the kid will blurt out the answer right away and say, oh no, think about it more. And then they go think about it and they come back with the right answer. It's kind of similar to that in a sense. And these sort of model excels in multi-step task, right? Something that's pretty hard and it requires you, for example, proving a mathematic theorem or something like that, where you have to lay out multiple steps and then go through, very complicated step in order to get to your answer. These models are trained to solve that kind of particular problem. And they also have the ability to backtrack, which is quite important, right? If you have interacted with one of these models before, you see that it will think and then talk to itself for a bunch of things, and then all of a sudden you just wipe out the whole thing and say, oh, yeah, scrap that, that's stuff.
I think you guys have managed. Wait, you just don't say
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, that's good. Okay, so because of that, these models are actually very good at doing programming-oriented tasks, which requires in-depth thinking, right? It's not a immediate, hey, who's the president of the United States sort of question that you have to answer, right? So, but there's one big problem with these sort of models. They're very expensive to train. And they're also sometimes very expensive to run. You kind of have to pay the price upfront or later. So you either, when you train the model, you basically say, hey, I want you to remember that reinforcement block, right? You basically say, hey, look, I want you to think harder. Tell me what you're thinking. And that means you have to spend a lot of money in the training. Or you sort of fake that, quote unquote, and do that at the time of inference. When someone asks a question, instead of having the model return the result immediately, you basically say, hey, are you sure that's the answer? Think more about it. Give me your plan, layout, and so on. So you end up using more token at that point. So some of these models are about 10 times roughly equivalent of the cheaper language model, that large language model. So that was the state of the art at the time. And then people believe that, oh my God, there's only like 3 companies in the world can afford building something like this. Until that's no longer the case. I don't know if you guys were following the news on this, but this was a big deal. When DeepSeek came out with their own reasoning model, which a lot of people argue was a distilled version of something more advanced, regardless, they have proven that you don't have to spend so much money on training one of these more advanced reasoning models. And ever since then, I think a lot of research teams have put in efforts on how to train or how to obtain performance similar to the top frontier model by spending very little amount of money. I think there was one paper that talked about spending like $2 or something like that, but that was the complete distillation of another model. So. But enough to say is this is quickly getting commoditized, and that's why even like the free version of ChatGPT now, if you go, you can actually use one of these reasoning models for a somewhat generous amount of tokens. And this one is another interesting thing. So, like I said, people didn't quite understand how the reasoning model worked. And this literally came out of the press. I think within a week, this was published by a bunch of researchers from Apple, which basically look at all these advanced models and say, are they really thinking, right? Because they look awfully like they're thinking. Can we prove that they're actually thinking or not? As suggested by the title there. So what they did is they basically subject these models to quizzes, right? Several different kinds of quizzes, and then they keep scaling the complexity of the quizzes. For example, one of the quizzes, one of the famous ones, Hanoi Tower. If you have kids, you've seen one of those with 3 sticks where you have to move the disk around in order to order them, and then they just keep putting more disk onto the stick. And then what they discovered was, the simple model obviously quickly fell and stopped able to answer the question correctly. But the more advanced model, reasoning model, start giving up at some point. They literally will say something like, I cannot solve this. I'm not going to do it for you as the answer. And that's consistent across, all the frontier model, and then consistent across different kind of quizzes. So the paper was drawing the conclusion and saying, these models are not really thinking, right? They are able to solve these things effectively, maybe because their training data was polluted by some of these quizzes at a lower scale. But if you keep pushing them upward, it's not. And this paper actually generated a huge amount of controversy right now. If you go onto internet search, this is probably the hardest thing right now in AI. People arguing about how the methodology was wrong and people, supporting it and all that. I think the jury's still out on this one. But enough to say, suffice to say that it seems like the models sometimes still get lazy, even if it's a reasoning model. Sometimes they just refuse to be pushed further. And no one knows why. And not only are these models expensive to run in general, they also take a long time to run. Right? So someone posted this, I found this really funny. If we cannot see the words here. The question was, how many words are in your response for this prompt? Okay, this is actually a tricky one, because if you think about it, a language model doesn't know until it answers, right? It's chicken and egg. I only know the number of words until I answer. So it's actually quite a tricky question for the language model to answer correctly. And impressively, yes, the language model managed to answer the question, right? 7 words in the response, if you count that as 7 words exactly. But it took 8 minutes. The language model was thinking for 8 minutes. And if you expand that, it's like a gigantic trace, right, of that, obviously, of what it's thinking, what the answer should be. And it spent 113K tokens. That's a huge amount of tokens that amount to about $2, give or take. And it takes about the same power as an LED light bulb in order to answer such a simple question, which pretty much any kids can answer within seconds. So it's kind of interesting that how these models sort of fall into these trap where they basically keep trying, eventually get the answer, but then they spend so much of the efforts in doing that. That seems hilarious almost. And I don't know if you guys seen this famous comic from XACD before. The original version was saying the #1 programmer's excuse for legitimate slacking off is the compiler is running. I'm waiting for the compiler to run. That was the original version. Now it's probably because we're waiting for your AI to think. So I'll move on to another newish topic on agents. Okay. And some of you might actually have come across this term before, prior to the whole Gen AI thing. There was actually a proper, I think, Dr. McDonald, Professor McDonald, you probably know this very well, right? The agents, software agents. It used to be a different terminology for agent, but now it's being reused for a different idea here. So the idea behind agent is you ask the language model to do some task for you, and these tasks are not straightforward. It's not as easy as I generate a bunch of code for me, right? These things might involve actually using some of the tools, okay? By tools, I mean things like a compiler, for example. So maybe the language model will choose to write a little bit of code and run against the compiler that you provide. Or maybe it will start a browser, look at a web page, grab a web page, and then analyze the web page. Or maybe it will connect to some API out there and then call the API, right? So essentially think of it as the language model used to be this box that you contain it within, the ChatGPT window or whatever. Now you're giving it arms and legs. So now it can actually reach out to the world and do something about it. So that's essentially what agent was about in a nutshell. But then there's also, you can see that there's a planning phase that basically the language model will think about the question or the task you're given to it and say, these are the set of tools I have. How do I best solve this problem? Right? Is it using tool A? Is it using tool B? Or none of these tools? They just think about it internally. And then go about using that and then get the response or the output and then look at the output and say, hey, did that answer my question? Did it answer the user's request? If not, you go and sort of repeat that loop over and over again until you eventually solve the problem. So another example could be, hey, my AI, please help me, buy the concert ticket to Taylor Swift. Okay, that's not an easy task because you have to go online and click refresh every 2 seconds in order to see when the tickets come out and then try to buy it, pay it with a credit card and all that. That is not something that a language model can do unless it was given access to a bunch of tools to do that. All right, and some of you probably have already noticed this image was actually generated using AI based off another image. And then AI made some interesting choices. I have no idea what Serica is. And then I think on the other hand here, that was supposed to be an end, but it decided I don't have space for end. So I'm gonna just put AN in there and squeeze it in there. And here's another hot topic in this area, which is called Model Context Protocol, MCP. This one also came out recently, probably in the last half a year or so, I think. So this was created by one of the top AI company out there called Anthropic, but has been widely adopted by thousands and thousands, if not millions of companies out there. So the core of it is about service discovery and tool spec. Okay, so remember the agent graph I just showed you, right? The agent wanted to get access to a bunch of tools, right? But how do you tell the agent that these are the tools available for you to use? And that's basically where MCP come in. Think of it as a standard for describing what are the tools available and how to use them. Almost like an API spec to some extent. And then the language model will look at that and know how to use some of these tools. And it runs in both local mode and in remote mode. What that means is, you can run everything locally. For example, if you have to run a compiler, normally you run it locally. So that would be a local tool that your IDE talk to. And then if you want to call some API remote, that will be a remote modality of MCP. And this is the literal tagline they give. They call themselves the USB-C port for AI application. So think of it as you can plug many different tools into an AI application through the MCP port. And then when I read this, I was like, why do you say USB-C? Why don't you just say USB? And there's a reason behind that. Because if you look at Google Trend, you can see clearly the red line is the search for USB-C, stay mostly flat. And then the blue line is the search for MCP, which obviously since it's launching, it has gone up and overtake USB-C. But if you put USB there, both of them will be a flat line around 0 because they're way more popular. All right, the final topic I want to cover today is about vibe coding. Once again, another new topic that just came out recently, widely discussed. I'll give you like 10 seconds to read through that Wikipedia definition of it. The gist of it is saying, hey, look, maybe we don't need to write programming language anymore. We can just use English or whatever language and ask the large language model to write that program for us. That's essentially vibe coding. But the funny story is your mileage may vary. It sounds like a really nice concept. You sort of democratize programming. So now people who don't know how to program can easily use a language of their choice, English, and program anything they want. But the reality is a little bit mixed bag, okay? So I'll show you some of the quote, famous quote. So Andre Karpathy is, I think, a lead AI researcher at OpenAI right now. He's the one who coined the original term vibe coding. And literally what he said, I just talk to a computer and then the computer just do programming for me. I don't even have to touch the keyboard. Ken Beck, who's the creator of extreme programming, another famous programmer out there, he described it as exactly like a slot machine. So when you play the slot machine, sometimes you get what you want, which is a lot of money, and most of the time you don't. But every now and then it'll give you a little treat, and then you get hooked and keep doing it. So I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. All right, Linus doesn't need any introductions. Hopefully you all know who he is. This is how he said, I'm looking forward to the tools to actually find bugs. So I think he's somewhat cautiously optimistic about it, but it doesn't sound like he had a lot of success with it yet. And finally, Grady Woosh, who is the co-author of UML. For those who don't know who UML is, that's the tool for designing object-oriented programmings and large enterprise software, etc. He called it alchemy incarnate. Okay. Once again, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? But if you look through all of that, basically it seems like magic when it works, but when it doesn't, you get very frustrated. Okay, and that's exactly how I feel when I use these sort of tools. And I'm about to commit the cardinal sin in any presentation, which is never run a live demo. So that's how, fingers crossed, that it works for me. I tried it a couple of times this morning. I get different results every time. So let's see what I get this time. Okay, hopefully you can see my ID right there. All right, to prove I did not cheat, this is a brand new folder with nothing in it. Okay, so I'm gonna start my journey, and I'm going to build a piano app. The reason behind that is my son started learning piano recently, and then I also started picking that up. So I thought it would be cool to make a piano app. All right, so we need some prompt. I'll give you a little bit of time to read through that. Hopefully it's large enough. Let me see if I can zoom in further. Okay, so these are not sophisticated prompt, right? I say create a basic React plus Vite app directly in the root folder. And why do I say directly in the root folder? Because it did not listen to me the first time around when I didn't specify it. The app should render a virtual piano with 61 keys. Why 61 keys? Because 88 keys is too long for the screen. So 61 keys, and with C4 aligned to the center of the screen. Okay, and you know why I add that particular line there, because it didn't do it the first time around. Okay, and the key should be labeled, and provide visual feedback when you click on it. For now, I don't want any sound. I just want to be able to click on it. So I'm gonna copy this from here. Oops. Paste. Bang. All right, you're gonna start seeing cursor works really hard. The first thing it does is realize, okay, I need to create some npm package. I'm gonna start downloading all the dependencies, etc. And you'll see that every now and then it'll think a little bit about what I'm asking exactly and then work on it. Okay, so now it's creating the component for the piano. For those who doesn't know, this is basically UI widgets on the screen. Okay, and then they start creating all the files. Still working, takes a little bit of time. So hopefully now you can relate to that comic I just showed you before. This is the time when you go and get a coffee. All right, so where's up to now? Okay, still doing the component. All right, I think it ran the type checker and realized there's some issue with type checker and then try to fix it. It's getting there. Oh, all right. Now it's doing something funny. It's trying to remove a file. Okay, let's see. Let's go anyway. All right, so it's starting the developer server. And let's see if it works. Like I said, every time I open it, it's a different piano. So Not too bad. All right, so it does actually create a piano like I instructed. Obviously this bit is kind of funny. Why would you have a key there? But that's a different story. And for those who have good eyes, this is not exactly 61 keys. Once again, I have no idea why it decided to generate fewer than 61 keys. But other than that, it looks about right. You have your middle C right here. Okay, it looks about right. A line in the middle, and C sharp, etc., etc. All good. Now, we're gonna take it up a notch. Like I said, it's a piano, so we're gonna make some sounds. Okay, I'll ask you to generate sounds. So whatever key I press, it should generate the corresponding sound. And then I also want to have a large label above the piano showing the note that I played. Come back here, paste it in. Off you go. All right, so I think most of the time, yeah, it correctly identified I need to use web audio API for it. I think there's one time when it realized it's just a package you can download and use it directly, but this time around it just tried to do that. Generate those frequency directly using web audio API. All right, now it's trying to update the component, so hopefully it will work. Oh, it realized it ran the linter, realized there's some syntax error, so it's trying to fix that. Okay, it's adding the CSS style to the node. All right, it's done. It's just explaining what it did. Let's see. All right. Fingers crossed. That worked. All right, we're gonna take it up another notch. I want a metronome. All right, I will make clicking sound at a whatever specified tempo, so I can practice against it. And enable and disable button essentially. Okay, so it's working hard adding the metronome component. And by the way, this IDE I'm using is called Cursor. And if you have used VS Code, it look awfully the same because it is based on VS Code. And right now, what I'm showing you, it used to be called a YOLO mode. You only live once mode, because it's actually quite dangerous, as you can imagine, giving language model unconstrained access to your computer and do whatever it wants. So you don't get this by default. You have to enable it. Otherwise, it will ask you throughout every single step, do you want to do this? Do you me to do this? Do you want me to do this? It's not very good for a demo, but I hope it doesn't delete my entire computer. All right, it's done now. Let's see the metronome. All right, not bad. 120 beat per second, per minute. I think it failed. It did not actually generate the clicking sound. But fear not, just come back and say, you didn't generate a clicking sound. Okay. And this is now uncharted territory because it didn't happen to me last time. So let's see what happens. Okay. twiddling your thumb, waiting. All right, trying hard to update, generate clicking sound. And by the way, I'm not really much of a front-end engineer, so most of these codes sort of beyond my reach. So without this, I can probably do it, but it would take me a very, very long time learning on how to do it and maybe doing even an inferior job. All right.
Dr. Lam, yes, is a question possible?
Sure. I'm hoping that this will finish very quickly, but if it's a short question, I can take it while we
Short question.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a generic problem with the AI in that it seems to forget instructions that it's given, and it gets much, much worse the bigger the project.
Yeah.
How do you envision this going away? What will it take to make that problem go away?
I see. That's certainly not a question I can answer before the AI finish running, which it did just now. Hold that thought and we'll answer you at the end, okay? Yeah. All right, second try. All right, verify it's working. All right, seems to be working fine. All right, final task. I'm gonna ask it to map the 5 keys, the central starting from middle C, to my keyboard, so I can play music on my keyboard. All right, and if you notice, this is actually kind of a difficult instruction. It's not a very detailed instruction, right? I use some of the notation that our computer might find it hard to understand. C4 to G4, right? That might be easy, but the key H2 semicolon, right? I mean, if you don't have the right context, that might look like H minus some semicolon, right? So, but surprisingly, the language model had no problem understanding exactly what I meant. And it will hopefully map everything to every single key on that keyboard layout. I didn't specify exact mapping of, hey, C should go to this key and D should go to that key. I just give it a range and it was able to sort of extrapolate that, fingers crossed, correctly. All right, struggling with some linking error, but hopefully we'll go through. All right, it's finished. Let's see. Oh, nice. It's even print the actual key mapping on the key directly. So. All right, that concludes my demo. Where's my slide go? Okay, I need to find my slide again, sorry. All right, looks like my praying to the demo got worked. So let's move on. Now we're gonna play a game, okay? Because you guys are so quiet. It's called Guess the Future. Okay. And you have seen my demo, and on the right-hand side, these are all the top startups that are currently working on making software engineer obsolete, essentially. So the game is I'm gonna give you a task that typically performed by a software engineer or developer. You tell me whether there's a high probability that's going to be completely replaced by AI, or medium probability or low probability. All right, please yell it out. Obviously, your first thing, coding. Any thought? No one? I'm gonna start pointing people if you don't yell it out. Hi, did I say hi? Any other person? Hi, raise your hand if you think it's hi.
I think if you give the technology.
Oh yeah, sorry, I should have specified it. The future is 5 to 10 years. Let's put it this way. Okay, the future is 5 to 10 years, not infinite. So those who think it's high, raise your hand. Okay, I think about almost more than half of the team think it's high. Personally, for job security's sake, I think it's medium. The example I showed you just now, that was a very small toy example. And even that, it took me several hours to get it right. And not even right, you saw it. It actually still screw up in the middle as well. Anything more complicated than that, I almost guarantee you it won't work. And even if it does, it generates code that is just so unmaintainable and terrible. And in every way, I don't think it's gonna really replace coding completely. But that being said, AI is being used in a lot of code generation, right? And in sort of small context, I think it works really well. Cursor, I didn't show you, but Cursor, one of the best thing about Cursor is has this autocomplete on steroid, right? So as you type your code, it will help you complete and then sort of try to guess what you're trying to type. And that works really well. That works far better than the agent mode where you just say, hey, do whatever you want. Here's the instruction, go and do it. So my bad is, yeah, programmer won't be completely out of job within the next 5 to 10 years, but their job will change significantly. They won't be writing all the code. AI will definitely be helping a lot on those fronts. All right, next, debugging, another common task. High, medium, that's a medium, okay. Low, okay, yeah, I think about 50-50, medium, low. Personally, I actually think this one is a medium, okay. The reason is not because the AI is very good at debugging, but it's very fast, okay. And it can run in scale as well. So I think the developer will get a lot of help from AI, sort of identifying bugs. And there's probably going to be a lot of false positives from time to time. But I do think, once again, similar to coding, I think developer will use a lot of AI tool to help them to debug things. But it won't completely replace them. All right, next one, code review. That's another task, a common task for developers. High. Okay, a couple of folks. Medium. More people. Low. All right, I think it's kind of even. This one, my vote is on medium. Okay, once again. A lot of companies are already attempting this, and they have varying degrees of success. Once again, this is one of those things that is not very obvious that will completely replace human, but it can definitely help human a lot. And think of it as maybe the AI will take a first pass of your code review and point out the obvious problem that are, easily pattern matchable. And then the people will come in and review the code at a higher level. So my bet is probably medium. All right, we'll hopefully go quicker. Discovery. By discovery, I mean when you are dropped into a new team, there's a huge code base, etc. Helping you understand the code, I guess, in that sense. High. Okay, a lot of people. Medium. Low. Actually, my vote on this one is on high. Okay, because personally, this just happened to me. I joined a new company, huge code base. I was using AI left and right to understand what the code is and quickly find things. For example, I know someone wrote a code about this, but using traditional keyword search may or may not be able to find the stuff that you want. And AI was actually fantastic at doing that. And I can even ask AI to basically summarize the entire code base and tell me what the code is about, where are the, what are these folders for, et cetera, and it's doing a good job there. So my bet is actually high. Documentation. All right, this is basically wiki pages or in-code documentation. Yeah, high. On hands. Medium. Low. You guys seeing the pattern, right? There's no low there. Lo and behold, there will be. Don't worry. So my vote on this one is actually medium. Okay. I think AI, once again, is good at writing certain type of documentation, but like I said, those high-level summarization-oriented documentation is actually pretty decent at doing that. But the more nuanced stuff, I still see a trip up from time to time. And those are the things that actually require documentation. And then a lot of time, the good documentation that you see from AI is basically a generation from the good documentation you put in the code in the first place. So if you give it a complete code without any documentation or that, a lot of time it won't be able to give you any good documentation out of it. So my guess on that is probably medium. Once again, it's one of those things where human have to collaborate with AI to get the best result. Optimization. High? No? Medium? Low? Okay, interesting. Mostly medium, low. My bad is actually high. If you think about it, optimization most of the time is very much pattern following. There's very well established way to optimize things. Yes, there are certainly novel ways of doing it, but I think there's enough of low-hanging fruit from optimizing based on typical patterns that AI will be able to apply pretty easily. Once again, AI will make it up, its lack of intelligence by running 10 times, 100 times faster than you. So I think it's a win in that case. It's similar to kind of security bugs, right? If you think about it, security bugs, there's well-established bunch of security things and all that even a dumb scanner is able to pick up pretty easily. Let alone an actual AI model coming around. Testing in QA, it's an interesting one. Does it include writing tasks and doing manual tasks, unit tests, integration tasks, all that sort of stuff? High? Okay, medium? All right, and low? Somewhat even, okay? My bet on this one, and sorry to all the testers out there, is high, okay? The reason behind that is, once again, there's a lot of repetitive laborious thing when it comes to, QA. And yes, language model may not, or AI may not be perfect, but it can make it up by running very fast, running at scale. And then also, every developer hates running unit tests, right? So they will try to use AI to write a test, even if it's not great. So I almost guarantee you that that's actually one of the most common use cases people when it comes to using AI for code is to write the boring part, which is test. So that's my bad. All right, two more, just bear with me. Architecture, design architecture in general. High? Medium? Okay, low? Okay, so mostly medium, low. My bet for this one is low. Okay, so far at least I have not seen cases when AI is capable of really doing this sort of level of abstractions and understanding, and then the big picture view sort of thing. Once again, I'm biased. My job security largely depends on that, so I certainly hope I don't get replaced. Communication. Hopefully this one is obvious. High? Medium? Low? No. This is only one thing that humans better than AI. So let's hope it stays in low. And communication is actually such an important part of developers that is completely overlooked. People think developers just write code. Actually, in fact, as you sort of progress in your career, you spend a lot of time talking to people, understanding requirement, and then try to communicate, problems and whatnot. At least so far, AI is not very good at doing that yet. So let's hope it stays that way. Yeah, finally, I'll leave you with this quote, famous quote from former CEO of IBM. AI will not replace humans, but those who use AI will replace those who don't. And thank you.
Hey, let's open for questions. What is it? Mark, I think when we want to predict future, we should consider two factors, especially for generation. First, we are considering the current state of the AI model, which I'm sure will be changed in the next 5 years. The other thing is companies don't want their IP to be leaked. So if they train the tool with using their code, which can improve the performance of code generation, because similar code will be generated, so the IP will be leaked. Those are, I think, two factors which will use the speed up elevating AI environmental code generation. Do you agree with this statement?
Oh, absolutely. I think you're right on the spot, right? So I'll take your second point, which is company using their proprietary code base to train the AI model. And Google, Meta, they've already been doing that. In fact, they've already been saying that 90% of the code is written by AI. I think a lot of those numbers is probably exaggerated, right? In the sense of, someone accepting the AI suggestion and maybe make some edits, that still counts as AI, for example, right? And then AI obviously can generate a lot of code compared to human typing it. So there's some bias towards that. At least when I talk to people who work in those companies, they haven't told us like, oh my God, I'll be out of job tomorrow. So I think that's at least there's some good sign there. Predicting the trajectory of the language model itself or AI progress is hard. Because, like I said, only 2.5 years since ChatGPT come out, right? And see how much we have come along. And I think that's the danger where people will basically say, okay, the next 2.5 years, of course, we're going to double or quadruple and all that. I think the jury's still out on that one. Like the Apple paper pointed out, right? There is some fundamental issue with the technology that there's no obvious answer to solve yet. So I'm a little bit pessimistic around the trajectory of the technology. I think it will definitely progress, it will get better and all that. But would it ever get to the point, forget about AGI, but good enough like a real software engineer? My guess is maybe not in the next 5 to 10 years. But that could be my famous last words. So.
You have a question? Did you raise your hand?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
To what extent is AI being used in the testing phase currently? Because in the New Zealand market, at least, I see testing is still the most in-skill demand. So currently, to what extent is it being used, and to what extent is it actually reliable?
I don't have any hard number to share there. I don't think there's anything that I've seen online either. But my personal experience is, I think it's actually one of the easiest thing to automate. Because if you think about it, right, when it comes to testing, whether it's writing tests or manual testing, right, all of that is pretty well documented on how to do, right? I have not met any testers say, hey, I'm very creative, I come up with my own way of testing. No, right? You follow whatever the run book is, right? Because you want to test every single thing that the run book say, right? So it's in that sense, it's a repetitive work, and it's something that is very predictable, so to speak. And in general, that's what computers are good at, right? Forget about AI, right? So and the reality is, most of the company, they're trying to automate testing for the longest time, right? Forget about AI or not, they've been doing that always, right? Is automated, even like the manual testing where someone has to go in and click something on the screen for something to happen. All of that is being automated right now without AI. Right? So I think AI will basically be an accelerator in that case. Yeah, but that's just once again my personal opinion. So.
Oh, sorry. Maybe we should give the online people a chance.
Yeah.
Darren
Okay.
asked the question
Yeah.
before.
So who want to go first?
Darren asked you.
Okay. Yeah, Darren, go ahead.
He just muted himself again.
I think it's Daniel, right? Is it Daniel or Darren? Daniel. Yeah,
Daniel.
Daniel, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, thank you, ma'am. Question was with regards to the short attention span or the omission of instructions in its memory. And for example, it forgot to do particular things in your demo. So what will make that go away, do you think? And how long will that take for it to be having a more constant memory and be able to not make mistakes like that?
I think there's multiple teams that are sort of working on improving it. There's multiple angles of doing it. Actually, in the enterprise world, one of the most, the prevailing way of solving that problem is using RAG. Right? I don't know if you're familiar with RAG, but RAG is, so that's kind of the not very fancy answer to your question, right? But I think there's multiple people who are studying why this is happening, right? It's catastrophic forgetting and forgetting in the middle. Sort of, there's all sorts of different variation of that, and it's a black box, right? Let's be honest, right? No one really understands how this thing works. So people are trying very different ways, and then some people try by inserting a tool, right? A memory tool or something like that, and try to memorize things across multiple response and all that. once again, it's probabilistic. So hopefully we'll see less of that. Right? So, but I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. There's just like there's multiple different approaches being used right now.
And then, Dr. Lau, a different question is, I've stumbled across this problem where I'm trying to have the LLM understand a document like a research article that has graphs and figures and maybe illustrations, and it seems completely unable to do so because it's a graphical thing, not a language. It's not, in other words, it's not words. It's something graphic. And some of the models will use subroutines to have the graphic decoded into words to pretend that they understand the graphic, which is lost. A lot is lost in translation. What can get rid of that problem? That seems like a structural problem, a fundamental problem of LLMs. Is there some way that will make this go away? And so it'll have a unified model of a research article, something that's published that includes graphs and illustrations and so forth.
Can you also just repeat the question to the
Okay.
audience?
Can you guys hear from my computer? Okay, so let me summarize the question. The question is about multimodal models, right? So a lot of time you have document with graphs and tables and whatnot. How do you teach LLM to understand that? That part actually, I can almost tell you, it's being very, very actively worked on. Many companies have put out multimodal models that can understand different things. Right, but then also once again even on the RAG side, it's the same thing. So there's a lot of RAG pipeline will basically take your PDF, for example, right, extract the text part, and then take the image part, put it into a different place, and then create embedding on top of it, unify embedding, separate embedding. There's multiple ways of people are doing it. So actually, I encourage you to do a little bit more research on that front. You'll probably find a lot of solutions out there already. You don't even have to wait for that.
Dr. Lam, I did find lots of solutions that claim to be solutions, but they do that trick that I just mentioned. They try to decode the graph into a textual representation of the graph, which you understand in a research article is not a simple bar chart. So they omit tremendous amounts of contextual information in the illustration or a graphic. I think they're cheating, is my point, and I'm disappointed that that they're hand waving. Oh yes, it's solved now. It's a solved problem. Move on, and that's not helpful.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this will probably lead to a lot longer conversation, but I'll encourage you to use ChatGPT, the latest version. Actually, you can upload a graph and it will understand it perfectly. You can ask it to explain to you. So I think there is a lot of improvement on that front. But yeah, sorry, this is not my area of specialty, so to speak. So I cannot really point you to the research paper.
And excellent presentation. I loved it. It was very good, by the way.
Thank you. Okay.
So another online question from Chris.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So thanks for sharing about this. So I'm also curious from your industry experience, right? So right now you mentioned the AI productivity will be a key for the software developer. So how do you envision that in the 5 years, right? How company will select the candidate? What kind of capacity they will priority first? And especially for your entrepreneurial experiences, how do you view is a good team member if you want to choose one? Yeah.
So yeah, so if we go back to that exercise we did just now, I think any skill that's good in sort of medium and low bucket are important skill to have as a developer. Anything in the high one, you can probably forget about it. That will be my personal opinions around it. But ultimately, I don't believe, at least I don't think we are at the point where the company is going to get rid of everybody and then just use AI and runs everything. So as long as there's people, any sort of people skill is going to take you a long way, and maybe even more important going forward than the actual hard technical skills. But I do actually have some concern around that particular point, where if you saw the figure that I showed before, right? New grads are having a hard time finding a job, that's because people think AI is equivalent to a junior engineer, for example. Then why hire someone from the university where I can use AI for a fraction of the cost, right? So, but then the problem is, yeah, we still need a senior people come around, do architecture, direct the language model and all that. But if you don't cultivate a stream of junior engineers, in the future, you're going to have the skill gap, right? because all the senior engineers will retire, and then there's no more people who come and fill in that gap. So there's some real concern from my part that it could lead to that sort of scenario, but it's too early to tell at this point. Yeah. But skill-wise, I think anything in the medium or low buckets are fair games.
Okay, just so that we're conscious of time, I'm going to pick one on-site question and one more online question. So you had
I
a
think give the chance to Andrea.
okay, all right. So
Adrian, I think, yeah.
Adrian.
Yeah.
Hey, Mars. First of all, I love the talk. Well done. Really enjoyed it, especially the last part in terms of sorting things into buckets. I'm very curious to hear your sort of, I guess, underlying thoughts on this in terms of progress. Are you of the frame of mind if we were to expand the time horizon, say from 5 to 10 years to 10 to 20 years, that would drastically change your bucketing? And maybe the example that I would point to is, say, something like Waymo and self-driving cars, where I think that project is now 20 plus years old. And in reality, it's only very recently that we've sort of got it working in a limited area in SF. Is that kind of how you're thinking about some of this stuff?
Yeah, I dare not to make any prediction beyond the 10-year horizon. Even the 10 years is already very, very hard. But I would not be surprised, let's put it this way. I would not be surprised there will be another breakthrough that comes through, not in the form of transformer, but in some other architecture that will get us closer to AGI. I do not believe we'll get to AGI in the next 10 years. But with some sort of fundamental changes in the architecture, I think we have a good chance. But no one has come up with the architecture yet. So
yeah, got it. Cheers.
Thank you. Any last questions from on-site there?
Just in terms of the abstract thinking that's needed for tasks like coming up with an architecture, do you see any way in which the current generation of models can be trained in terms of improving their ability to think in an abstract manner?
I think it's possible. I just haven't seen any evidence of it able to do that. And I think also the recent trend, given the recent research, it seems that throwing more hardware, throwing more data at it is not going to necessarily solve that problem.
Does that require some amount of self-reflection or getting to the zone of consciousness?
I think so, yeah, most probably. I would not doubt that it will be able to do part of that, right? It will be able to do maybe a half-ass thing when it comes to architecture and all that looks like human and even sometimes good, right? But I think the risk of them making like a fundamental decision wrong is so high that I don't think we'll be adopting that sort of thing.
Okay, so once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Mas Lam for a wonderful presentation. Please join me to thank the speakers again.
And final thing, if you're worried about AI, not yet, don't. It's still very bad at generating fingers.
Thank you.